I'm Amber Wilson, 28, and what should have been the happiest day of my life became the moment I discovered my entire relationship was built on deception. Standing in my white lace gown beside Ryan Mitchell, my new husband of exactly 3 hours, I felt my stomach drop when my mom approached with that strange smile. The crystal chandeliers of the Mitchell estate ballroom suddenly felt too bright as she leaned in close and whispered, "We're passing the car his parents gave you." The confusion must have shown on my face because Ryan's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances across the room. Something was terribly wrong. If you're watching this, please hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I escaped what happened next. Ryan and I met 3 years ago at a college alumni fundraiser. Before him, my life was simple but satisfying. I taught 4th grade at Westlake Elementary, lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Springfield that I decorated with secondhand furniture and plants, and spent weekends hiking with my rescue dog Bailey. My Honda Civic was 7 years old but reliable. I'd saved for 2 years to buy it outright. That night at the fundraiser, I was volunteering at the registration table when Ryan approached. Tall, with neatly styled dark hair and a smile that crinkled the corners of his hazel eyes, he introduced himself as a marketing executive for Mitchell Enterprises, a company I would later learn was named after his family. "You look far too interesting to be stuck behind this table all night," he said, handing me a glass of champagne after my shift ended. We talked until the venue staff began stacking chairs. Ryan was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my stories about teaching. When he asked for my number, I hesitated, only briefly. There was something almost too perfect about him, but I gave it to him anyway. Our first date was at an upscale restaurant where the waiter knew him by name. I felt out of place in my department store dress, but Ryan made me feel special. The whirlwind romance that followed was like something from a movie. Weekend trips to wine country, surprise deliveries of flowers to my classroom, and thoughtful gifts that showed he listened when I talked. 6 months into our relationship, Ryan took me to meet his parents at their estate in the hills overlooking the city. The Mitchell family home was more like a small hotel with manicured grounds, a pool that seemed to merge with the horizon, and interior design that belonged in magazines. Robert and Catherine Mitchell were polite but reserved. They asked questions about my family, my career, my future plans in a way that felt more like an assessment than genuine interest. "Teaching is such a noble profession," Catherine had said with the slightest pause. "Though I can't imagine the salary is anything to write home about." When I told my parents about meeting the Mitchells, my mom, Linda, expressed the first notes of concern. "They come from a different world, honey," she said as we washed dishes together in the kitchen of the home I grew up in. My father, James, a construction foreman, nodded in agreement from the kitchen table. "Just make sure you don't lose yourself trying to fit into theirs," Dad added. But I was already in love, convinced that our differences didn't matter. Ryan proposed after only a year together, presenting me with a diamond ring that made my coworkers gasp. We planned a 6-month engagement, which quickly became consumed with wedding preparations that seemed to grow more elaborate by the day. 2 months before the wedding, Ryan's parents presented us with an engagement gift, a brand new BMW sedan with a red bow on the hood. "You can't keep driving that old Honda as a Mitchell," Robert had said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. The car made me uncomfortable. It cost more than my annual teaching salary, and parking it in the school lot felt ridiculous. My parents were equally uneasy when they saw it. "That's quite a gift," my father had remarked, running his calloused hand over the pristine paintwork. "What's the catch?" "Dad, not everyone has an ulterior motive," I had replied, irritated by his skepticism. The tension between our families became more apparent during wedding planning. The Mitchells insisted on hosting the ceremony and reception at their estate, overruling my parents' offer to contribute their life savings toward a venue I'd loved. Catherine took over most decisions from the flowers to the menu, always with a comment about upgrading my initial choices. My best friend Megan noticed my growing unease during my final dress fitting. "Are you sure about this, Amber?" she asked, as I stood on the pedestal in a gown that cost as much as my car. "Marriage is hard enough without starting with this much imbalance. It's just different backgrounds," I insisted. "We love each other. That's what matters." By the wedding day, I had convinced myself that the families had reached an understanding. The ceremony was perfect, from the string quartet to the release of white doves as we exited the garden archway as husband and wife. I pushed away the small voice that wondered why so few of my friends and family seemed to be among the 200 guests. I had no idea that in just a few hours, my mother's words would reveal the first crack in the foundation of my marriage, a crack that would soon become an unbridgeable chasm. The reception was in full swing by sunset. Crystal glasses, clinked string lights, twinkled overhead, and waitstaff in black ties circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The Mitchell Estates Grand Ballroom, normally imposing with its marble columns and chandeliers, had been transformed into a fairy tale setting with cascades of white orchids and roses. I moved between tables in my designer gown, accepting congratulations and posing for photos. Ryan charmed everyone his hand possessively at the small of my back. From the outside, we must have looked like the perfect couple, he in his tailored tuxedo, me in my couture dress surrounded by opulence and well wishes. But something felt off. My side of the ballroom, where my modest collection of relatives and friends sat, seemed subdued compared to the boisterous laughter from the Mitchell side. I caught glimpses of my parents throughout the evening, my father tugging uncomfortably at his rented tux collar, my mother sitting stiffly in her new dress, barely touching the gourmet food on her plate. When the band took a break and Ryan became engrossed in conversation with some business associates, I made my way to my parents' table. Dad rose to hug me, and I noticed his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You look beautiful, pumpkin," he said, using my childhood nickname that suddenly made me feel very young and vulnerable. Before I could respond, Mom took my arm. "Can we talk privately for a minute, sweetheart?" We walked to a quiet alcove off the main ballroom. Mom's expression was troubled her fingers, nervously twisting her wedding ring, a simple gold band that Dad had saved for months to buy when they were young. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice low. "About the car, the BMW." I frowned, confused by the sudden change of subject. "What about it?" "It's not what you think, Amber. It's not really a gift." She took a deep breath. "Last week, Robert and Catherine asked your father and me to dinner. Without you and Ryan. We thought maybe they wanted to surprise you with something nice." The sick feeling in my stomach intensified. They had papers with them, ownership documents for the car. They explained that the vehicle will remain in their name. They're passing it to you as a test. A test? What does that mean? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. They said they needed to see if you could maintain the Mitchell standard. They're evaluating how you care for it, how you present yourself while driving it. Mom's face flushed with anger. Robert said they needed to know you could earn your place in their family before transferring any assets to your name. I felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Does Ryan know about this?" Mom nodded slowly. They spoke about it as if it was all arranged in advance. With him, my mind raced back to other gifts from the Mitchells, the designer clothes that Catherine insisted on buying me always, with comments about appropriate attire for family events. The spa memberships where the staff seemed to report back on my appointments. The weekend trips to their vacation properties where I was subtly critiqued on everything from my table manners to my conversation topics. "There's more," Mom continued, her voice breaking. "They mentioned other conditions about when they expect grandchildren, how they should be educated, even what you should wear to company functions. They talked about you like an investment." The ballroom suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Through a gap in the crowd, I saw Ryan laughing with his father, their heads bent together conspiratorially. As if sensing my gaze, Robert Mitchell looked up his expression, calculating as he assessed me across the room. "I need to talk to Ryan," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in my hands. I found him near the bar accepting congratulations from a group of his friends. Without ceremony, I pulled him away, ignoring his protests. "Is it true?" I demanded once we were alone in a side room. The car, the conditions, all of it. Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to resignation. "Your parents weren't supposed to tell you yet. We were going to explain everything after the honeymoon. Explain what that I'm on, some kind of probation with your family, that nothing they've given us is really ours." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You're overreacting. That's just how my family does things. They have standards, traditions. The car is just the beginning. Once you prove yourself, there's so much more they'll do for us." "Prove myself I'm your wife, not an employee applying for promotion." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Look, my family has worked hard for their success. They're just protecting what they've built. You knew who I was when you married me, who we are." "I thought I married someone who respected me," I replied, tears threatening to spill. not someone who set up secret tests with his parents. Our argument was interrupted by the wedding photographer who had been capturing candid moments throughout the reception. "Everything okay here? I thought I'd get some shots of the happy couple alone." Ryan immediately plastered on his charming smile. "Just a little wedding day stress. We're fine." But we weren't fine. As the photographer positioned us against a backdrop of flowers, I noticed Robert Mitchell watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable. When the photos were done, I excused myself and fled to the bridal suite, locking the door behind me. Sitting on the plush ottoman in my $1,000 dress, I felt like an imposter in someone else's life. The woman in the mirror with professional makeup and an updo secured by 100 bobby pins suddenly seemed like a stranger. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how had I missed the signs? 1 week after our wedding, Ryan and I were halfway through our honeymoon in Bali. The beachfront villa was spectacular, thatched roof, private pool steps from the ocean, but the paradise setting only heightened my sense of unease following my mother's revelation at the reception. Ryan had been dismissive of my concerns, insisting I was overreacting and that his parents were simply old-fashioned about family wealth. He'd been extra attentive since arriving in Bali, surprising me with couples massages and sunset cruises, keeping us so busy I barely had time to think. That morning, Ryan left for a golf game, with some executives staying at our resort networking. Never stopped even on our honeymoon. I declined to join them for lunch afterward, claiming a headache. As soon as his rental car disappeared down the palm-lined drive, I did something I'd never done before. I opened his laptop. The password was easy to guess, the name of his first dog followed by his birth year. For someone so protective of his family's assets, Ryan was surprisingly careless with his digital security. Or perhaps he'd never imagined I would look. I wasn't sure what I was searching for until I found a folder labeled AM Financial, my initials. With trembling fingers, I clicked it open. The folder contained spreadsheets tracking every purchase I'd made over the past year, categorized and annotated with notes: unnecessary, acceptable, questionable, judgment. There were screenshots of my social media accounts with similar assessments of the content I shared and the friends who commented. Most disturbing was a document titled Marriage Agreement Draft 3. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't just a prenuptial agreement, it was a behavioral contract disguised as one. It outlined financial penalties for everything from inappropriate public behavior to excessive spending on personal items to failure to attend family functions. There were clauses about maintaining a suitable appearance requirements for attending Mitchell Enterprises events, and even specifications about my career teaching was acceptable only until children arrived, at which point I would be expected to become a full-time mother and family ambassador. The final pages included a lineage security section with requirements for producing at least 2 children within the first 5 years of marriage, provisions for their education at Mitchell-approved institutions, and restrictions on how much time they could spend with my side of the family. I felt physically ill. This document reduced me to a broodmare and social accessory. Worse, according to the metadata, Ryan had been one of the document's editors. He hadn't just known about it, he'd helped create it. I copied the files to a cloud account I rarely used, then carefully restored the laptop to exactly how I'd found it. When Ryan returned that evening, sunburned and relaxed from his day of golf, I struggled to act normal. We had dinner on our private terrace, the sound of the ocean, a counterpoint to my racing heart. The next morning, I suggested a walk on the beach. In the early light, with no one else around, I finally confronted him. I found the documents, Ryan. The tracking spreadsheets. The marriage agreement. He stopped walking. A muscle in his jaw twitched, the tell he had when caught off guard. "You went through my computer." His voice was dangerously quiet. "That's what concerns you, not the fact that you and your family have been monitoring me like I'm some kind of investment property." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture that I once found endearing. "It's not like that. My family has certain expectations. We have a lot to protect." "Protect from what? From me, your wife? You don't understand what it's like to come from wealth, Amber. People target us. They see dollar signs, not people." The implication was clear. "So I'm a gold digger. Is that what your family thinks? What you think?" "I didn't say that." He kicked at the sand. "But you have to admit, your life has improved considerably since we've been together." The casual cruelty of the statement took my breath away. "I was happy before I met you." I had a job, I loved friends, a life. A life in a tiny apartment driving a car held together with duct tape, he scoffed. At least it was mine, not something being held over my head as a test of worthiness. A couple walking their dog glanced our way and Ryan lowered his voice. Look, I'll talk to my parents. We'll figure something out. This agreement isn't final, it was just a draft. A draft you helped write. There were notes in your handwriting, Ryan. He had the decency to look embarrassed. Some of those provisions are extreme. I was going to tell them we need to dial it back. I stared at the man I had married, trying to reconcile him with the person who could participate in such a scheme. Do you actually love me, or am I just someone who checked enough boxes on the Mitchell family approval list? Of course I love you. He reached for my hands. My parents are old-fashioned and controlling, I know that. But they'll come around once they get to know you better. We just need to play their game for a little while. I wanted desperately to believe him. Despite everything, I loved Ryan, or at least I loved the person I thought he was. And we were only a week into our marriage. Didn't I owe it to us to try? No more secrets, I said finally. If we're going to make this work, I need complete honesty from now on. Absolutely, he agreed, looking relieved. No more secrets. He pulled me into an embrace, and over his shoulder, I watched the waves crash against the shore. Something had broken between us, a trust I wasn't sure could be repaired. But I decided to give him one more chance. That night, I called Megan from the bathroom while Ryan was swimming. I don't like this, Amber, she said after I explained the situation. These are serious red flags. Financial control is a form of abuse. He promised to fix it, I said, not entirely convinced myself. Maybe he's right about his parents being controlling. That doesn't mean he's like them. Just be careful, Megan warned. And know you can call me anytime. For anything. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The carefree bride who had arrived in Bali a week ago was gone. In her place was a woman with shadows under her eyes and a decision to make. I chose hope. Hope that Ryan would stand up to his parents, that our love was stronger than the Mitchell family's control, that we could build a life on our terms. As I rejoined him on the terrace for a nightcap under the stars, I pushed away the nagging voice that warned this was just the beginning. 3 months into our marriage, the Mitchell family's grip on our lives had only tightened. We lived in an elegant Tudor-style house in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a wedding gift from Ryan's parents that, like the car, remained firmly in their names. It's just temporary until the trust paperwork goes through, Ryan assured me whenever I brought it up. But somehow the paperwork was always delayed for one reason or another. Our weekly Sunday dinners at the Mitchell estate had become an exercise in endurance. I sat through 3-course meals where Catherine critiqued everything from my choice of dress to how I held my fork. Robert peppered me with questions about my teaching job that always circled back to when I planned to move on to motherhood. You know, Amber, Catherine said during one such dinner, delicately dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, your background is quaint. But now that you're a Mitchell, you really should consider upgrading your wardrobe. Those department store clothes don't properly represent the family. Ryan, who once would have defended me now, nodded in agreement. Mom has a point, Amber. First impressions matter in our circles. The next day, Catherine arrived at our house with a personal stylist in tow. My closet was methodically purged of anything deemed unsuitable, replaced with designer pieces I would never have chosen for myself. When I objected to a particularly revealing cocktail dress, Catherine smiled thinly. Darling, Ryan married you for your looks, among other things. It would be a shame not to highlight your assets. The comment stung, especially when Ryan later echoed the sentiment. You do look amazing in that dress, he said, his gaze appreciative, but somehow detached, as if assessing a purchase rather than admiring his wife. My teaching salary, once a source of pride and independence, now went into a joint account I couldn't access without Ryan's approval. When I discovered this and confronted him, he shrugged it off. It's just easier for tax purposes, he explained. Besides, you have the household credit card for anything you need. That card, I soon discovered, generated detailed reports that went straight to Ryan's email. Every purchase was categorized, analyzed, and often questioned. Did you really need another houseplant? He asked one evening, scrolling through the statement on his phone. That's the 3rd one this month. The house feels sterile, I replied, looking around at the professionally decorated space that never quite felt like home. Plants make it more livable. Just try to be more mindful, he said in the same tone he used when speaking to junior employees. We have a budget to maintain. The irony of budgeting concerns coming from someone who thought nothing of dropping thousands on golf clubs or watches wasn't lost on me. Isolation crept in gradually. My friends from teaching called less frequently as I was forced to cancel plans last minute due to unexpected Mitchell family obligations. Megan, persistent as always, still checked in regularly, but our conversations became strained as I found myself unable to share the full truth of my situation. "How's married life?" she asked during one of our rare coffee dates. "Busy," I answered vaguely. "Ryan's work keeps us on our toes." She studied me carefully. "You've lost weight, and you're wearing more makeup than you used to." I touched my face, self-consciously aware of the expertly applied foundation covering a sleepless night. Just adapting to my new role, I guess. My parents noticed the changes too. During our monthly dinners, now held at restaurants rather than their cozy home because Ryan found their neighborhood uncomfortable, my mother increasingly looked at me with worried eyes. "You don't laugh anymore," she observed one evening while Ryan was taking a business call outside. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" "I'm adjusting," I replied, the standard answer I'd crafted to deflect concern. "Marriage is different than I expected." Dad's weathered hand covered mine. "Different doesn't mean you have to disappear, Amber." Their concern only made me more determined to make the marriage work to prove I could navigate this world I'd married into. But the evidence of control kept mounting. One morning, I noticed a small device in the corner of our bedroom ceiling. Further investigation revealed similar units throughout the house. "They're just security cameras," Ryan explained when confronted. "Dad's security team installed them. Standard procedure for family properties." "In our bedroom." "In my bathroom." "Don't be dramatic. There aren't cameras in the bathroom." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's for our protection." I didn't believe him. That night, I discovered the monitoring went beyond cameras. While Ryan showered, I checked his iPad and found an app tracking my phone's location, cataloging everywhere I'd been for the past 2 months. The car, the BMW that had started this whole revelation, disappeared for routine maintenance whenever I mentioned visiting friends or family without Ryan. It would return mysteriously once those plans were canceled. "Take an Uber if it's so important," Ryan suggested, knowing my teacher's salary, now controlled by him, couldn't sustain regular rideshare expenses across town. The final straw came when I discovered my classroom had been visited by a private investigator hired by Robert Mitchell. One of the school administrators, impressed that a Mitchell was interested in our humble school, mentioned the visitor to me in passing. Such a thorough family checking up on their investment in education, the administrator gushed, unaware of how her words chilled me. That night, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I was in a financially abusive relationship, and it was only getting worse. The beautiful house was a cage, the designer clothes, a uniform, the luxury car, a tracker. The woman looking back at me, thinner, with dark circles under carefully concealed eyes, dressed in clothes chosen by someone else, was becoming a stranger. And the most frightening realization was that if I didn't find a way out, she might disappear completely. 6 months into marriage, the facade of happiness I'd struggled to maintain finally shattered during what should have been a simple dinner party. Ryan had invited several colleagues and their spouses to our home, an important networking event he emphasized with people who could influence his next promotion. I'd spent days planning a menu that balanced sophistication with comfort, arranging flowers from our garden and selecting wines I thought would impress without appearing ostentatious. I even wore one of Catherine's approved dresses, a navy blue sheath that cost more than my monthly teaching salary. The morning of the dinner, Catherine Mitchell arrived unannounced, letting herself in with a key I hadn't known she possessed. "Just checking that everything's up to standard," she explained, wheeling a suitcase behind her. "I've brought a few things to help." Those few things turned out to be an entire alternative dinner party from different flowers. Yours looked rather provincial, dear, to new table linens. The ones you selected don't complement the china to an entirely different menu. You were going to serve pasta as a main course. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in horror as she reviewed my planned menu. To Bernard Walton, his wife is a food critic, for goodness sake. It's a homemade ravioli with truffle and— No, this won't do at all. She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "I've brought Xavier to take over the kitchen." Xavier, it turned out, was the Mitchell's personal chef who proceeded to commandeer my kitchen and discard most of the ingredients I'd carefully purchased. Catherine supervised the transformation of our dining room, replacing my understated centerpiece with an elaborate crystal and orchid arrangement that blocked guests' view of each other across the table. I retreated to the bedroom, fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. When Ryan arrived home early to prepare for the evening, I expected him to be equally upset by his mother's interference. Instead, he seemed relieved. "Thank God Mom stepped in," he said, straightening his tie in the bedroom mirror. "Bernard Walton is notoriously picky about food. We can't serve him homemade pasta, like we're running an Italian grandmother's kitchen." The casual dismissal of my efforts stung. "Your mother had no right to take over our home. She has a key I didn't know about. Doesn't that bother you?" Ryan barely glanced at me. "It's technically their house, Amber, and tonight is crucial for my promotion. Just follow Mom's lead and try not to say anything too." Elementary school teacher. I stared at him, this stranger in expensive clothes, who had once made me feel like the most important person in his world. "I am an elementary school teacher, yes, but tonight you're a Mitchell wife," he replied, as if this were the greater honor. The dinner party progressed exactly as Catherine had orchestrated. The guests, mostly older men with much younger, immaculately preserved wives, praised the food, the wine, the decor. I smiled and nodded and poured drinks, feeling increasingly like waitstaff rather than a hostess in my own home. Midway through the main course, some complicated fish dish that had replaced my ravioli, Robert Mitchell raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced. "To my son Ryan, whose work on the Westfield account has secured him a promotion to senior vice president effective next month." Applause and congratulations circulated around the table. Ryan beamed, accepting the praise with practiced modesty. And of course, Robert continued, his gaze settling on me with what I now recognized as calculated assessment. "We must acknowledge the support team. Catherine and I have worked hard to help Amber become presentable for the Mitchell family's social obligations. I think we can all agree she's come quite far from her humble beginnings." An uncomfortable ripple of laughter circled the table. One of the wives, a former beauty queen married to a man 30 years, her senior, gave me a look of pitying solidarity. I maintained my smile until the last guest departed shortly after midnight. As the door closed behind them, I turned to Ryan, who was loosening his tie with a satisfied expression. "How dare you let your father speak about me that way," I said, my voice shaking. "Like I'm some project you've rescued from poverty. Like I should be grateful for being presentable." Ryan rolled his eyes. "He was paying you a compliment, Amber. Don't be so sensitive." "A compliment? He humiliated me in front of your colleagues, and you said nothing." "Because I'm not going to create a scene at an important business dinner over your hurt feelings." He moved to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch. "Besides, Dad wasn't wrong. You have come a long way from that apartment with the futon sofa and thrift store dishes." 6 months ago, I might have swallowed the insult, might have convinced myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I was done making excuses. I liked that apartment. I liked my life. I had freedom and friends and work I was proud of. Ryan's expression hardened. "And now you have a life most women would kill for. Designer clothes, luxury cars, a beautiful home. Do you know how entitled you sound complaining about all this?" He gestured expansively around the room. "None of it is mine. The clothes were chosen for me, the car is used to control my movements, and this house." I looked around at the perfect, soulless space. "This house has never been a home." "My parents were right about your kind," Ryan snapped, his handsome face twisting with contempt. "Give you a taste of quality, and suddenly nothing's good enough." "My kind," I repeated, ice forming in my veins. "People who didn't grow up with standards, who don't understand what it takes to maintain a certain position. Everything is just handed to you, and you still complain." I laughed, a bitter sound that seemed to surprise us both. "Handed to me, I've done nothing but comply with impossible demands since the day we married. I've changed how I dress, how I speak, who I see. I've given up control of my own salary. I'm followed, monitored, criticized at every turn. What more do you and your family want from me?" Ryan stepped toward me, using his height to intimidate as he towered over me. "We want you to show some goddamn gratitude and stop acting like you're doing us all a favor by being here." For the first time in our relationship, I felt physically afraid of him. I stepped back, bumping into the designer sofa. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "This isn't a marriage. It's ownership." Ryan's laugh was ugly. "And go where back to your parents' middle-class mediocrity. You've gotten used to this life, Amber. You won't last a week without it." When I moved toward the stairs to pack a bag, he blocked my path. "You're not going anywhere. We're going to fix this attitude problem of yours. Get out of my way, Ryan. Instead, he grabbed my phone from the side table where I'd left it during dinner. No more dramatic late-night calls to your little teacher friends. He pocketed the phone, then took my purse as well, removing my wallet. And you won't be needing these. My heart hammered against my ribs. You can't keep me prisoner in my own house. It's not your house, he reminded me coldly. And I'm not keeping you prisoner. I'm helping you calm down and think rationally. He took the car keys next. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll apologize to my parents for your behavior tonight, and we'll move forward. This little rebellion is over. I spent that night locked in our bedroom, Ryan having made a show of sleeping in the guest room to give me space to reflect on my choices. In reality, he was guarding against my escape. In the morning, Catherine arrived bearing shopping bags and a bright false smile. I brought breakfast and some new outfits. She announced sailing into the kitchen where I sat nursing a cup of coffee. Ryan tells me you had a little emotional episode last night. Before I could respond, she pulled a small white plastic stick from her designer handbag and placed it on the counter between us. I also brought this. It's time we settled the Mitchell family's future, don't you think? I stared at the pregnancy test, a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy washing over me. I'm not ready for children, I said, pushing the test away. Catherine's smile didn't waver. Nonsense. You're 28. The perfect time for starting a family. And it will give you something productive to focus on instead of these little identity crises. From another shopping bag, she produced a tiny outfit, a miniature version of the sailing clothes Robert wore on his yacht. I took the liberty of picking up a few things. Of course, we'll need to convert that little room you use as a home office. Babies need proper nurseries. The casual way she discussed my body, my future, my home, as if all of it belonged to the Mitchell family, and not to me, crystallized everything. This wasn't just about control. It was about erasing me entirely, replacing me with a Mitchell-approved version whose only purpose was to produce the next generation. I have to get to school, I said, standing abruptly. It was Saturday. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile remained fixed. Of course. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow at dinner. Ryan mentioned you weren't feeling well, so I've taken the liberty of canceling your plans with that friend of yours today. Megan is it. You need your rest. After she left, I stood in the silent kitchen, the pregnancy test, and baby clothes, mocking me from the counter. The magnitude of the trap I was in came into sharp focus. If I became pregnant, the Mitchells' control would be absolute. I would be tied to them forever with a child as leverage. I needed to escape. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. The realization that I needed to leave Ryan and the Mitchell family hit me like a physical blow. But I couldn't simply walk out the door. With no access to my bank account, no car, and no phone, I was effectively trapped. I needed a plan and allies. First, I had to make Ryan and his family believe I'd accepted my role. For the next week, I was the perfect Mitchell wife, apologetic about my emotional outburst, appreciative of Catherine's guidance, and attentive to Ryan's needs. I wore the clothes they selected without complaint, smiled through another excruciating family dinner, and pretended to consider the pregnancy test Catherine had left behind. I'm just not sure about the timing, I told Ryan carefully when he brought it up. With your promotion, wouldn't it be better to wait until we're settled in your new role? The strategy worked. Ryan relaxed his surveillance, returning my phone, though I suspected it now had tracking software and car keys. The cameras in our bedroom mysteriously disappeared, though I had no doubt others remained throughout the house. With my limited freedom restored, I put my plan into motion. My first step was to meet with my mother away from any Mitchell-monitored locations. I need to leave him, I said bluntly, as we sat in a small cafe 15 miles from my house in a neighborhood the Mitchells would never visit. I'd parked the BMW at my school and taken 3 buses to get there, leaving my phone in my classroom desk. Mom didn't look surprised. We've been worried sick about you, sweetheart. Your father and I barely recognized you at dinner last month. I fought back tears as she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I don't know how to get out. They control everything, my money, the house, the car. Not everything, Mom said firmly. Your father and I have been saving. After that wedding reception conversation, we knew something wasn't right. We've got almost $15,000 set aside for you. The revelation that my parents had been preparing for this moment broke the dam on my emotions. I cried silently as Mom outlined what they could offer: temporary housing in their spare room, financial support. until I could access my own account's dad's truck to move my belongings. "We'll do whatever it takes," she promised. No one treats our daughter like property. With that crucial support secured, I moved to the next phase of my plan. Jessica Ramirez, a lawyer who had volunteered at my school's career day, agreed to meet me during my lunch break. "What you're describing is financial abuse," Jessica confirmed after I explained my situation. "Unfortunately, it's more common than people realize, especially in relationships with significant wealth disparities." She outlined my legal options, explaining that while divorce was certainly justified, extracting myself from the Mitchell family's web would be challenging. "Start gathering evidence," she advised. "Bank statements showing your salary deposits, emails, or texts about financial control documentation of assets they've put in their names but presented as gifts to you. And most importantly, secure your essential documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, teaching credentials." I began methodically documenting the abuse. I forwarded emails from Ryan questioning my purchases to a new account I created on a library computer. I took photos of the cameras hidden throughout our house. I recorded Catherine's phone calls where she dictated my schedule and appearance. At school, I created a hidden emergency fund, tucking away small amounts of cash from classroom supply reimbursements and the occasional tutoring session I could arrange without Ryan's knowledge. I kept the money taped inside a poetry anthology in my classroom cabinet, along with copies of my important documents. I researched domestic violence resources, though I hesitated to use the term for my own situation since Ryan had never hit me. But as one hotline counselor gently explained, abuse isn't just physical. Control is abuse. The trickiest part was maintaining my facade at home while secretly preparing to leave. I attended Mitchell family functions with a placid smile. I nodded when Catherine talked about nursery designs. I slept beside Ryan while mentally cataloging what belongings I would take and what I would leave behind. 3 weeks into my planning, I took a calculated risk and confided in Megan over lunch at a restaurant far from both our usual haunt. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her expression shifting from shock to determination as I outlined the extent of the Mitchells' control. "What can I do to help?" Megan's apartment became my contingency option if my parents' home wasn't safe. She also offered to store some of my personal belongings, photo albums, journals, irreplaceable mementos from my life before Ryan, that I could move gradually without arousing suspicion. As my escape plan solidified, I set a target date, May 15th, when Ryan was scheduled to attend a 3-day business conference in Chicago. The timing gave me a crucial window to move out without direct confrontation. Just when I thought my preparations were on track, I nearly got caught. Ryan came home unexpectedly during a day I'd taken off work to scan and secure additional documents. I barely managed to close the laptop and hide the papers before he walked into our home office. "What are you doing home?" he asked, suspicion immediately clouding his features. "Migraine," I lied, pressing a hand to my temple. "The lights at school were making it worse, so the nurse sent me home." He studied me carefully. "You don't look sick." "I took some medication," I improvised. "It's just starting to help." For a terrifying moment, I thought he would demand to see my phone or check my browser history. Instead, he merely frowned. "You should have called me. I would have come home to check on you." To monitor me, he meant. "I didn't want to bother you during your important meeting." That seemed to satisfy him, but the close call rattled me. I needed to accelerate my timeline. The final piece fell into place unexpectedly. Maria, the housekeeper who came twice weekly to clean our home, another Mitchell gift that was really surveillance, approached me cautiously one afternoon when Ryan was at work. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said quietly, using the name I'd never fully embraced, "I find something you should see." She led me to the guest room closet and pointed to a small device tucked behind the vacuum cleaner, a voice recorder. "There are more," she whispered. "In your bedroom, your bathroom, your closet. Mr. Mitchell's father's security men installed them last month when you were teaching." The revelation that I was being recorded in my most private moments should have horrified me. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. "Maria," I asked carefully, "how do you feel about the Mitchells?" Her expression said everything. "They treat people like furniture, Mrs. Mitchell." "I see how they treat you too." In that moment, I gained another ally. Maria agreed to text me if Ryan's parents made any unscheduled visits on my planned escape day. She also offered crucial intelligence about the house's security system and which cameras were real versus fake. 1 week before my planned departure, I overheard a conversation that confirmed I couldn't leave soon enough. I was supposed to be upstairs changing for another Mitchell family dinner, but I'd forgotten my earrings and returned quietly to the living room. Ryan was on the phone with his father, their voices carrying clearly from the study. "The papers will be ready next week," Robert was saying through the speakerphone. "Once she's pregnant, we'll have her sign everything over. The prenup provisions kick in fully once there's a Mitchell heir. She's being difficult about the pregnancy tests," Ryan replied, frustration evident in his voice. "Mom's been pushing too hard, making her suspicious." "Well, get it done," Robert ordered. "The foundation board position is contingent on you having your house in order. That includes a wife who knows her place and a baby on the way." "I'll handle it," Ryan promised. "She's wearing down. Another month, and she'll be too exhausted to fight it anymore." I slipped back upstairs, my heart pounding. They had a timetable and legal documents ready. Whatever freedom I still maintained would be completely stripped away once they trapped me with pregnancy and more binding agreements. That night, I revised my escape plan. I couldn't wait for Ryan's business trip. I needed to leave the moment an opportunity presented itself, even if that meant a more risky departure. As I smiled my way through another Mitchell family dinner, nodding as Catherine detailed the renovations she'd planned for our nursery, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had spent 6 months being gradually erased, molded into a Mitchell accessory. But they hadn't succeeded yet. The real Amber, the woman who had built a life on her own terms before meeting Ryan, was still there waiting. And she was about to reclaim her freedom. My opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after overhearing Ryan's conversation with his father, he announced he needed to fly to Seattle for an emergency client meeting. "I'll be gone 2 nights," he said, packing his tailored suits into a garment bag. "Try not to cause any drama while I'm away." The condescending remark, once so hurtful, now washed over me without effect. I was already mentally cataloging what I could accomplish in 48 hours of freedom. "I'll just focus on grading papers," I replied mildly. "End-of-year assessments are keeping me busy." He kissed my cheek perfunctorily before leaving. "Don't forget dinner with my parents tomorrow night. Mom's introducing you to the hospital charity board." I nodded obediently, knowing I would be hundreds of miles away by then. The moment Ryan's car left our driveway, I sprang into action. First, I texted Maria to confirm she wouldn't be coming tomorrow. I didn't want her implicated in my escape. Then I called my parents from the landline, using our established code phrase. "The recipe you wanted is ready," I said when Mom answered. "Can I bring it over tomorrow?" "We'll be waiting," she replied, understanding perfectly. "What time should we expect you?" "Early. I'll text the details from my school phone in the morning." Next, I systematically moved through the house, gathering only what was truly mine from before the marriage clothes. I'd purchased myself books, personal mementos, and the few pieces of jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. I left behind everything the Mitchells had given me, including the designer wardrobe, the expensive watch from our first anniversary, and the diamond earrings I'd worn to placate Ryan at dinner parties. I worked through the night packing essentials into ordinary tote bags rather than suitcases, which would be more conspicuous if anyone was watching the house. I disabled the BMW's GPS tracker using instructions I'd found online, though I planned to abandon the car soon anyway. By dawn, I had removed every trace of my personal identity from the house, leaving behind a shell that resembled a Mitchell wife, but contained nothing of Amber Wilson. At 6:30 a.m., I left for school as usual, the tote bags hidden under blankets in the trunk. Instead of going to my classroom, I drove to the long-term parking lot of a nearby shopping mall, where Megan was waiting in her reliable old Honda. "You're really doing this," she said as she helped transfer my bags to her car. "I don't have a choice." I handed her the BMW keys. "My dad will pick this up tomorrow with the spare key. Park it near the food court entrance." We drove to a storage facility where I'd secretly rented a small unit under my maiden name. There, we unloaded everything except one bag of immediate necessities. Megan hugged me tightly before we parted. "Call me when you're safe," she insisted. "And don't look at social media whatever happens." I took 3 different buses to reach my parents' house constantly, checking to ensure I wasn't followed. When I finally arrived, Mom was waiting by the window. She rushed out to envelop me in a hug that felt like coming home. "You're safe now," she whispered fiercely. "We won't let them near you." Dad had reinforced the locks on all doors and windows. He'd also parked his truck inside their garage out of sight, ready for our departure the next morning to my aunt's house in another state, a location the Mitchells didn't know existed. "I'll take a personal day tomorrow and drive you myself," he said, his weathered face lined with worry. "Your mom will follow in her car in case we need to separate." The level of planning my parents had put into protecting me brought tears to my eyes. While I'd been carefully constructing my escape, they had been creating a safety net to catch me. That evening, I used a prepaid phone to call Jessica, my lawyer friend. "I've left him," I said simply. "What happens now?" "Legally, you've taken an important first step," she explained. "But the Mitchells won't make this easy. They'll likely claim you've stolen property, abandoned the marriage without cause, possibly even that you're mentally unstable." Her prediction proved accurate faster than any of us anticipated. At 8:15 p.m., exactly when the charity dinner would have started, my parents' phone began ringing incessantly. When they finally answered, Catherine Mitchell's shrill voice echoed through the speakerphone. "We know she's there," she said, without preamble. "Put Amber on the phone immediately." My father, a gentleman who rarely showed anger, responded with a coldness I'd never heard before. "My daughter doesn't wish to speak with any of you. Do not call here again." Within an hour, Ryan was pounding on my parents' door demanding to see me. We remained silent inside, lights off, as he shouted threats about police reports and legal consequences. Eventually, he left, but not before warning that his family would destroy all of us if I didn't return. The next onslaught came via email, dozens of messages to my school account, alternating between Ryan's pleas for reconciliation and Robert Mitchell's thinly veiled threats. I forwarded each one to Jessica before deleting them from my inbox. By morning, the Mitchells had escalated. My principal called concerned to inform me that Robert Mitchell had shown up claiming a family emergency and demanding my schedule and home address. He seemed very insistent, my principal said carefully. "But of course, we don't release staff information to anyone." We left for my aunt's house immediately after that call, taking back roads and switching vehicles at a predetermined location where my cousin met us with his car. The 3-state journey took 14 hours, but by nightfall I was safely ensconced in my Aunt Ellen's guest room, hundreds of miles from the Mitchells' reach. Over the following days, their tactics grew more desperate. Ryan filed a missing persons report claiming I was mentally unstable and had disappeared under concerning circumstances. Robert Mitchell hired private investigators who began harassing my known friends. Catherine Mitchell even called my mother's workplace, attempting to get information by pretending to be from a doctor's office. Through it all, I maintained radio silence, communicating only through Jessica, who had officially become my divorce attorney. When Ryan finally received my divorce petition, the gloves truly came off. "They're claiming abandonment and breach of contract," Jessica informed me during our weekly call. "They're demanding the return of all gifts and suggesting you had an affair." I laughed hollowly at the absurdity. An affair? I wasn't allowed to speak to other men without Ryan present. "It's a common tactic," she explained. "They're trying to control the narrative and pressure you into a quick, quiet settlement." The pressure increased when Ryan somehow obtained my aunt's address. A legal courier arrived with settlement papers, offering a modest sum in exchange for my silence and a comprehensive NDA that would prevent me from ever discussing the Mitchell family or my marriage. I declined. "They're not used to being refused," Jessica warned. "Prepare for things to get uglier." She was right. Over the next 3 months, as the divorce proceedings dragged on, the Mitchells launched a smear campaign against me in their social circles. Former acquaintances sent screenshots of conversations where Ryan portrayed me as a gold digger who had married him for his family's wealth, then fled when asked to sign a reasonable post-nuptial agreement. Most painful was discovering that some of the parents from my school had been approached by Catherine Mitchell with fabricated concerns about my fitness as a teacher. Thankfully, my principal stood firmly by me, but the whispers followed me nonetheless. The legal battle became increasingly vicious. The Mitchells' lawyers demanded financial records from my entire life, subpoenaed my parents' bank statements, looking for evidence of conspiracy, and filed motion after motion to delay the proceedings while draining my limited resources. What they didn't expect was the network of support that materialized around me. Jessica, outraged by their tactics, began representing me pro bono. Former Mitchell employees, hearing of my situation through the grapevine, came forward with their own stories of manipulation and control. Even one of Ryan's ex-girlfriends reached out through a mutual connection, sharing her own harrowing experience with the family's controlling behavior. The turning point came 4 months after my escape. Maria, the housekeeper, contacted me through Megan with a game-changing piece of information. "The recordings," she said. "I know where they keep them all." With legal guidance, Maria provided evidence about the surveillance system that had monitored my every move in what was supposed to be my home. The revelation of hidden cameras in private spaces, like bathrooms, crossed legal lines that even the Mitchells' expensive lawyers couldn't defend. When confronted with this evidence and the possibility of criminal charges for illegal surveillance, the Mitchells suddenly became eager to settle. In a sterile conference room, 6 months after I'd fled the marriage, I sat across from Ryan for the first time since my escape. He looked both angry and somehow diminished his handsome features, tight with barely controlled rage. You could have had everything, he said quietly, as our lawyers reviewed the settlement terms. I met his gaze steadily. "I already have everything I need. My freedom isn't for sale." The final settlement wasn't a financial windfall. I walked away with my personal possessions, my teaching certification intact, and enough money to start over without debt. Most importantly, I secured my right to tell my story without the constraints of an NDA, a provision that clearly infuriated Robert Mitchell. "You'll regret this decision," he warned as the final papers were signed. "The Mitchell family has a long memory." I didn't doubt his threat, but it no longer held power over me. "So do I replied simply. "And unlike you, I have nothing to hide." As I walked out of that conference room, officially divorced and legally free of the Mitchell family's control, I felt the weight of the past year lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I'd need to rebuild my career, possibly in a new city, and heal from the psychological impact of the financial and emotional abuse I'd endured. But for the first time since my wedding day, when my mother had whispered that cryptic warning about the car, I was making my own choices again. And that made all the difference. 1 year after my escape from the Mitchell family, I stood in the center of my new apartment, sunlight streaming through windows. I decorated with plants, as many as I wanted. The space wasn't large or luxurious by Mitchell standards. A 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house in a college town 3 states away from my former life. But every item in it was mine, chosen with intention rather than assigned by someone else's vision of who I should be. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier after a grueling legal battle that tested my resolve on a daily basis. The Mitchells had fought dirty, attempting to drag my name through every social circle they influenced. Ryan had alternated between tearful pleas for reconciliation and vindictive attempts to destroy my teaching career with false allegations. In the end, what saved me wasn't just Jessica's brilliant legal strategy, but the unexpected coalition of others who had been similarly controlled by the Mitchell family. 3 former daughters-in-law from Robert's brothers' families had come forward with almost identical stories of financial abuse and surveillance. 2 former executives from Mitchell Enterprises provided evidence of the family's pattern of control and manipulation. Even Ryan's college girlfriend reached out, sharing how Catherine had systematically isolated her from friends and family before Ryan eventually ended the relationship on his mother's instructions. The settlement I received wasn't substantial. I had never wanted their money, but it provided enough for a fresh start and covered my legal expenses. More valuable was the absence of a non-disclosure agreement, leaving me free to speak about my experience despite the Mitchells' desperate attempts to silence me. I'd relocated and found a teaching position at a progressive elementary school that valued my experience and creativity. My 4th-grade students knew nothing of my past, seeing only Miss Wilson, the teacher who brought enthusiasm to science experiments and stayed late to help with reading challenges. The healing process had been neither quick nor linear. In the initial months after leaving, I jumped at unexpected sounds, constantly checked for surveillance, and struggled to make even small purchases without anxiety. My therapist, Dr. Renee Carter, had gently guided me through recognizing the patterns of financial abuse that had become normalized in my marriage. Financial control is often overlooked as a form of domestic abuse, she explained during one of our weekly sessions. But it's extremely effective at creating dependence and eroding self-worth. Through therapy and a support group for survivors of financial abuse, I gradually reclaimed my autonomy. The first time I bought a dress simply because I liked it, without calculating its appropriate value or anticipating criticism, felt like a revolution. Opening a bank account in my name only with passwords no one else knew was a declaration of independence. My parents had been my rock throughout the ordeal. They'd protected me in those vulnerable first days, never once saying "we told you so," despite their early reservations about the Mitchell family. Now, they visited my new home regularly, Dad bringing his tools to help with small projects, Mom filling my freezer with homemade meals. "I'm proud of you, Pumpkin," Dad said one evening as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. "It takes courage to rebuild from scratch." My mother, never one for sentimentality, had been more direct. "You're stronger than they ever knew," she said. "Than you knew, maybe." She was right. The woman who had fled in the night with just a few tote bags of possessions was unrecognizable from the eager-to-please wife I'd become during my marriage. That version of me had been gradually erased, replaced by a Mitchell-approved simulation who checked every box but had no substance. The real Amber had nearly disappeared completely. My friendship with Megan had deepened through the ordeal. She had risked the Mitchells' wrath to help me escape and continued to be my confidant as I processed the aftermath. When she visited my new apartment for the first time, she brought a housewarming gift that made me both laugh and cry, a small potted plant with a card that read, "To new growth." No one monitoring how many plants you buy now. The support group I'd joined for financial abuse survivors had become another pillar in my reconstruction. Every Thursday evening, I sat in a circle with women and men whose stories echoed aspects of my own partners who had controlled access to money, monitored spending, created dependence, and isolated them from support networks. Together, we celebrated small victories, opening independent bank accounts, applying for credit cards in our own names, making purchases without fear of interrogation. 3 months after moving to my new city, I started a workshop at the local Women's Resource Center, helping others identify the warning signs of financial abuse and create safety plans for escape. The workshop grew from 5 participants to 25 with a waiting list for the next session. "You've turned your pain into purpose," the center's director told me after one particularly powerful session. That's the most healing path of all. Not everything had been resolved, of course. The Mitchells' threats about their long memory occasionally surfaced in unexpected ways. A potential employer who suddenly rescinded a job offer, a landlord who changed his mind about renting to me. But these instances became rarer as I moved further from their sphere of influence. My personal life had also begun to heal in unexpected ways. 6 months after settling in my new city, I bumped into Mark Peterson at a community garden volunteer day, a former colleague from my teaching days before Ryan. We'd been casual friends then, but nothing more. Now, as we worked side by side planting tomato seedlings, conversation flowed easily between us. "I always wondered what happened to you," he admitted, as we washed soil from our hands afterward. "You sort of disappeared into the Mitchell world." I hesitated, still cautious about sharing my story. "It's complicated." "The best stories usually are," he replied, with no pressure for details I wasn't ready to share. Our friendship developed organically over weekly garden sessions and occasional coffee meetings. Unlike Ryan's whirlwind courtship, with its lavish gestures and intensity, this connection grew slowly, built on genuine conversation and shared values. When Mark eventually asked me to dinner, I surprised myself by accepting. "Just dinner," I clarified. "I'm still figuring out who I am on my own." He had nodded understanding. "I'm a patient man, and I like who you are right now." That dinner led to others, and gradually I found myself opening up about my experience with the Mitchells. Mark listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and expressing appropriate outrage at the right moments. "Financial independence isn't just about money," he observed one evening after I described the Mitchell family's surveillance tactics. "It's about having the power to make your own choices." Those words resonated deeply with me. The Mitchell fortune had never been the true issue. It was the way money had been weaponized as a tool of control, a means of erasing my autonomy one decision at a time. That lesson became the foundation of the presentation I developed for local college students about financial literacy and relationship red flags. Financial abuse often begins subtly, I would explain to rooms of attentive young faces. The love bombing with expensive gifts. The generous offer to handle the finances. The gradual questioning of your purchases. By the time the control becomes obvious, you're already isolated. The presentations led to a broader advocacy role with a national organization focused on economic justice for abuse survivors. My story shared with permission from my legal team, but without the sensationalism the Mitchells had feared, helped illuminate a form of domestic abuse that often went unrecognized. 1 year to the day after my escape, I celebrated my independence by buying my own car, a practical, fuel-efficient model I could easily afford on my teacher's salary. Nothing flashy or status-oriented, just reliable transportation that belonged wholly to me. The saleswoman seemed confused when I insisted on taking a photo beside it, keys in hand. First car purchase on my own, I explained, not elaborating on why this ordinary transaction felt so monumental. That evening, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment. My parents, Megan, who had driven up for the occasion, Jessica, who had become a dear friend beyond her role as my attorney, and Mark, whose steady presence in my life had become a comfort rather than a complication. As we shared a meal around my secondhand dining table, another independent purchase I'd celebrated the conversation turned to the journey of the past year. If you could go back and talk to yourself at your wedding, what would you say? Megan asked, refilling her glass with the modestly priced wine we were enjoying. I considered the question, carefully thinking of that moment when my mother had approached with her cryptic warning about the car, the first crack in the perfect facade. I'd tell her to trust her instincts, I said finally. That love shouldn't require erasing yourself. That real security comes from independence, not expensive cages. And that walking away isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest choice you can make. My father raised his glass. To brave choices. As our glasses clinked together, I felt the final pieces of my healing click into place. The Mitchells had tried to remake me in their image, to erase the authentic Amber and replace her with a compliant accessory to their dynasty. For a time, they had nearly succeeded, but in losing everything they had given me, I had reclaimed something far more valuable myself. The road forward would have its challenges. The Mitchells' influence cast a long shadow, and the psychological impact of prolonged control didn't disappear overnight. But I had built a foundation of genuine support, financial independence, and self-knowledge that no one could take away. My new life wasn't defined by luxury cars or designer clothes or mansions on hills. It was measured in freedom, the freedom to choose my own path, to spend my own money to fill my apartment with as many plants as I wanted, the freedom to be authentically, imperfectly myself. And that was a wealth beyond anything the Mitchells could ever comprehend. If my story resonates with you or sounds like someone you know, please remember that financial abuse is real and devastating. Have you ever experienced or witnessed the warning signs I've described? Share your thoughts in the comments, and please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories of survival and renewal. Your support helps others find their way to freedom. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is never determined by the price tags attached to your life.